President Biden is absolutely not dropping out as the Democratic presidential nominee. Now, that's according to his White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. She told that to reporters on this afternoon. Earlier, Biden and Vice President Harris called in to a campaign meeting to give staff members a pep talk. The activity comes as Biden and aides seek to tamp down continuing Democratic angst over his debate performance last week. And Justice Department officials plan to pursue the criminal cases against Donald Trump past Election Day, even if he wins, under the belief that department rules against charging or prosecuting a sitting president would not kick in until Inauguration Day in January. That approach may become more consequential given this week's Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity, which probably will lead to further delays to Trump's election interference trial in December and has already affected his Manhattan state court prosecution and conviction. And a proposed amendment to enshrine access to abortion care in Nebraska's constitution moved closer to appearing on the ballot in November after a coalition of reproductive rights advocates on Wednesday submitted the required number of valid signatures to state officials. Protect Our Rights, the group leading the ballot effort, announced that it had collected the signatures of more than 207,000 registered voters, more than the approximately 123,000 needed to submit before a Friday deadline. And three judges are telling Mississippi to redraw some of its legislative districts, saying the current ones dilute the power of Black voters. Excuse me. The National Black Farmers Association called on Tractor Supply's president and CEO down after the rural retailer announced that it would drop most of its corporate diversity and climate advocacy efforts. Real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. I do not have a cold. I'm just coughing a little. Tomorrow is the 4th of July. And I want to remind you, I will be on the air at the same time, Areva Martin Real Time, 4 p.m. PST. But tomorrow, I will be replaying an interview I did earlier with Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. This is a dynamic young lawmaker who is shaking things up in Congress. We had a very just riveting conversation with her a couple weeks ago. So make sure you tune in tomorrow at 4 p.m. PST for the interview with Representative Jasmine Crockett. Also, as you all know, tomorrow is the 4th of July. And in 1852, Frederick Douglass was asked to present a speech on the 4th of July at the Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York. Now, he was asked to do this to commemorate the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which had happened 70 years earlier. Well, Frederick Douglass refused to speak on July 4th, but he did agree to do so the next day. And in refusing to do so, he stated, these are his words, "This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn." Frederick Douglass asked and explained and went on to write one of the most famous speeches, which he did give on July 5th in 1852. That speech is entitled, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." So tomorrow, in between your barbecue, in between your cookouts, in between watching Areva Martin in real time, Google "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." It is such a riveting speech. It has relevancy today in the same way that it did back in 1852. And because so many states are trying to prevent us from knowing and learning Black history, American history, it is incumbent upon us to teach ourselves about iconic leaders like Frederick Douglass and to read their words. There are cities around the country that host events on the 4th of July, and individuals will stand in front of city halls or in front of governmental buildings and recite "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." So Make sure you check that out tomorrow. And in this hour, this is the hour where we go a little deeper, where we dig behind the headlines and bring you those stories that people are talking about. Today, I'm going one on one with Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. She is an American theologian who is the co chair, along with William Barber II, of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. She's also the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice at Union Theological Seminary. She is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. And Dr. Theo-Harris wrote a brilliant article entitled Christianity Will Fail If We Don't Stop Christian Nationalism. She said we must resist Christian nationalist form of religion which parallels the morality of the Roman Empire that Jesus challenged. So, in this hour, we're going to be asking her to define for us what Christian nationalism is. There's a lot of confusion, I think, in terms of what it means when we talk about Christian nationalism. What is this relationship to white supremacy and white nationalism? We're also going to talk about how Christian nationalism has shown up in so many of the policies, particularly those enacted in red states by GOP lawmakers, and how it's playing, it being Christian nationalism, how it's playing such a prominent role in this year's presidential election. So I'm so excited to sit down with Pastor Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. I've interviewed her several years ago, so it's always good to catch up with activists like her to see what they have been doing. I know in her case, what she's always doing is working on eradicating poverty in this country and working to advance social justice issues and causes. When we come forward, none other than Dr. Liz Theo-Harris joins me on Areva Martin in Real Time, right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
You're listening to Areva Martin in Real Time on KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by participating in a virtual tenant workshop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Hey LA, today I'm here to talk to you about Grid Alternatives, which is a nonprofit in LA that focuses on renewable energy. We serve communities who have been left out of the renewable energy sector. We offer paid job training, and in 13 weeks, you can become a solar installer. 80% of our graduates get hired into the industry, and once you're hired in the industry, you stop at a high, medium income. That could be $20 an hour or more. 80% of our graduates get hired into the industry. Call today so you don't be left out at 323-861-0105 or gridalternatives.org, gridalternatives.org.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Kind of like choosing Derek Jeter as the pinch hitter for your baseball team.
Jeter, you're in. We need a home run.
I'll give it a try. I've swung a bat once or twice.
That's out of here.
Yep, even easier than that. With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One N.A. member FDIC.
We're with Bridget, whose husband won't be home for months, and whose daughter is due any day. We're with Mike, who's leaving home to protect his family and yours. We're with all service members and their families who need community, connection, and maybe a bit of magic. Are you with them? Learn more at uso.org today.
We are back, and in this hour, I'm going one-on-one with Dr. Liz Theo Harris. She is an American theologian, I should say. She is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, and she's also the co-chair, along with William Barber, of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Good to see you, Dr. Liz. Always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. I am so excited to talk with you about this brilliant article that you wrote on Christian nationalism. So many people are misinformed about what Christian nationalism is, and I couldn't think of a better person to have on the show today to help us better understand what it is, when to recognize it when we see it, and why it's so important that we have to fight against it. So welcome to the show, and let's just jump right in. Please tell us, what is Christian nationalism?
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to be hearing the real issues that are impacting our society and our lives today. And we hear them here. And one of those indeed is Christian nationalism, right? I mean, this kind of idea that that we have an equal sign between the flag and Christianity, a theology and kind of political ideology that that raises up white supremacy, that is about putting women and LGBTQ people in their place, that you know, basically replaces a lot of the texts and scriptures in Christianity, that are about justice and lifting from the bottom so everybody can thrive and not just barely survive. But instead saying that the issues that Christianity is concerned with is who's marrying who, who's having sex with who. The idea that Jesus was a card-carrying member of the NRA, and we have a real problem in our society right now with politicians and so-called religious leaders, kind of putting this veil of Christianity on exclusion and on hate and on this kind of whole MAGA movement. And when actually there couldn't be something that's further from what's in those scriptures.
Where does it get where did it start? I mean, is this something that's been around forever, and now just because of, social media and the 24-hour media cycle, we're hearing about it more? Or, is this something that's relatively new?
Yeah, so this is a really important point. I mean, both some form of Christian nationalism and of kind of Christian supremacy and of white nationalism and white supremacy have been, here in these yet to be United States since the founding and before the founding of the nation, with the genocide of First Nations, indigenous people, and with U.S. chattel slavery and a kind of a slave holder religion that created a whole Bible that took out the prophets, that took out the story of the Exodus, that took out Jesus's inaugural sermon. And so there are long and deep roots of kind of a religiosity, a Christianity that is on the side of the status quo and those in power and being used against people of color and poor people and women. But it also is important for us to see, especially those images we saw on January 6th, when folks were, rioting in the Capitol, and had those gallows, had those crosses, were really covering themselves in religiosity and in Christianity, that there is this kind of new manifestation of white Christian nationalism that he has never been in the position it is right now. I mean, like, what folks will say, with Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, the third most powerful position in this country, is a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist, and someone who, has political and ideological beliefs that are very damaging and very extreme. And so I think it's important for us to both see that this is some form and fashion of politicians upholding racism, upholding classism, upholding the downtrodden of women and others, is not new, and yet the threat of white Christian nationalism is very real, and we see it especially in this election cycle with this Project 2025, which if your viewers are not aware of, folks should surely make ourselves aware, because it's about the kind of overturning of public education. It's about not having regulations or taxes for corporations, but it's all cloaked in kind of a religiosity and a Christianity that again is that is not the Gospels.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Thea Harris. When you talked about it being, basically as old as the founding of this country, when I think about the whole, Christianity movement to proselytize, to convert indigenous people, to Christianity, I think about Jesuits that enslaved people and try to, again, convert them to Catholicism. Were all of those efforts by those early white Christians, would they be considered Christian nationalist?
It's a good question. And there are experts that are more of experts than I am on this topic. And I think there have been different manifestations of Christian extremism and of religious extremism and Christian nationalism throughout this history. But I think there is a thread, there is a through line between the kind of theology and religiosity of those in the MAGA movement today with that slaveholder religion, that anti-indigenous religion, the boarding schools, the kind of conversion of people, and it's changed throughout history, and its influence is definitely very significant today, and something that especially we're seeing the Supreme Court, we're seeing this Congress, and we're seeing in this presidential race a kind of a white Christian nationalism that is very harmful. As a person of faith myself, and as someone who has looked at theology and religion and the role it's played, both for good but also for exclusion and hate and lies, I think we need to be very concerned.
I think that's what confuses a lot of people, because the rise of Donald Trump, in particular, in 2015 or so, white evangelic leaders coming to his aid, coming to him, like blessing him, coming up with these excuses for his adultery, excuses for the kind of behavior that he engaged in that otherwise they taught against in their churches, and saying somehow he was a Messiah, and that lots of people that God had chosen to lead were flawed individuals, and using scripture and Bible verses to prop him up causes a lot of people, you hear people repeating those kinds of talking points, suggesting that somehow he is this kind of biblical like figure, right? That was brought onto this earth or delivered onto earth, or whatever term you want to use, to save us from whatever. But that makes it very confusing when people start mixing religion with politics, and those people who don't feel perhaps as well versed in the Bible, don't study the Bible. Sometimes I think they feel ill-equipped to fight back on some of these points that you'll hear Christian nationalists make about why they support Donald Trump and why what he's doing is somehow preordained in the Bible.
Well, and I think it's important for us to hear when we hear someone like Donald Trump saying, "I and I alone can fix your problems," and that these kinds of phrases. I mean, those are not quotes of Jesus. Those are quotes of who Jesus is organizing against in Caesar, right? And those are lines that come from empire, from those who have the power and the wealth in the world. And use it to abuse, those at the bottom. And so I think it is confusing because we've begun to see almost an equal sign between Christianity and extremism. But if we go back to those scriptures, if we look at the religious roots of justice, there's 2,000 passages in the Bible that have everything to say about, lifting up the poor, binding up the brokenhearted, comforting those that are mourning, welcoming in the immigrant neighbor. I mean, just so many of the issues that are still in our lives today, in our world today. And the Bible has something to say about them. But you know what the Bible doesn't talk about is abortion. Even though there were people getting abortions at the time that Jesus was walking the earth. What the Bible doesn't actually talk about, despite folks saying it does, is who gets to love and marry who. In fact, who was managing who was allowed to marry, and banning same-sex marriages at the time of Jesus was Augustus Caesar. It was not Jesus Christ, right? And so if you're going to side with someone who says that I can fix your problems alone, you're siding with.
Well, let me stop you right there, Dr. Theo Harris. That's a good point you make about gay marriages. So there are Christians who don't consider themselves Christian nationalists or white Christian nationalists that will say there are biblical, scriptures that prohibit men from marrying men, women from marrying women, they prohibit gay marriages. And you just said it was Caesar who was speaking out against or banning gay marriages, not Jesus. So again, I just go back to the level of disinformation, I guess, that is out there, that's disseminated, that people buy into to perpetuate these false narratives.
No, I think that's right. I mean, and there are a couple of places in the Bible where there are passages that are talking about, kind of using sex and sexuality to abuse people. But in those passages, there's kind of a condemnation of a Greek word that is porneia. And so we often will, translate that as, pornography, or we'll translate it as, not being monogamous, or, like all of these different kind of words that come out in our society today. When you look at these passages, for instance, the passage about Sodom and Gomorrah, that's a critique of people in society who have power that are misusing that power and treating people poorly. Now, if you read that text itself, right, but that's not what we hear. We hear that it's about men having sex with each other. There's passages in Paul's epistles, but there. If you look at the context of those texts, if you see what's going on right in those passages, again, it's a critique of using rape or a different power balance with those that have power in society. I mean, it's more of a Jeffrey Epstein kind of situation here, right? It's those that think they can play with other people's lives, including their sexuality. And I think there isn't a lot of information about this, and we don't talk about this a lot, including as people of faith, and I think it's important. And I think it's I think it changes how we understand, what the Bible really says. And the Bible really, lifts up justice and righteousness, and those are about how society is organized around the needs of absolutely everybody. And there's a lot that the Bible has to say. And it's mostly about the issues that concern people, whether it's living wages or healthcare or women's rights or children's rights or including everyone, no matter their abilities. That's what the Bible talks about, not about using it to kind of beat up on other people.
Yeah, when we come forward, I want to continue this conversation. Obviously, Dr. Theo Harris, want to talk about how the Poor People's Campaign, the campaign that you and Reverend Barber lead, how are you all talking about this election to the constituents, the base that you serve? I know that your work is so focused on eradicating poverty in this country, lifting up issues of social justice. How in this moment where people are so divided and people are so panicked about what another 4 years would look like under Donald Trump, how are you getting a message through that cuts through some of the Christian nationalist messages that many people are hearing and being inundated with? Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580, when we come forward.
More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. President Biden has no plans to drop out of the 2024 race. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre took many questions from reporters over the president's mental fitness following his poor debate performance, where he appeared to lose his train of thought at times. She conceded the president has not had a medical exam since his annual physical in February and stressed the president suffered from jet lag and a cold during the debate. The jet lag is in reference to when Biden returned to the U.S. on June 15th after traveling abroad 12 days ahead of the debate. The mayor of North Charleston, South Carolina, is pledging to cooperate with an FBI investigation into the city. Mayor Reggie Burgess's office issued a statement responding to reports the agency had opened an investigation into the city, saying it supports any inquiries. The FBI is reportedly looking into the city's gun violence reduction program, which paid out over $1 million to various nonprofits, but did not oversee where the money was spent. That's the latest. I'm Amber Payton on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
Similar crash from earlier this afternoon continues to involve a tanker truck on its side blocking the off-ramp and connectors to the 405 North on the 118 East at Sepulveda. Traffic remains backed up and stopped from Rosita Boulevard with no estimated time of reopening. Delays in Torrance are ahead on the 110 South after Sepulveda Boulevard as stop traffic from Highway 91 continues up to 20 minutes as an accident blocks the left lane. Back in Hollywood, CHP is on scene on the 101 South before Sunset Boulevard with stop traffic from Cahuenga Boulevard East as two right lanes are still blocked with a major accident.
Craftsman Days are here at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select V20 tool when you buy a Select battery 2-pack. Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid through 7/20 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers' father and son combination is now official and also historic. LeBron James and his son Bronny signed contracts with the Lakers Wednesday morning, making them the first father and son in NBA history to be on a roster at the same time. LeBron agreed to a 2-year deal worth $104 million. Bronny signed off on a 4-year deal for $7.9 million. The first 3 years are guaranteed. LeBron will be 40 in December. His career is winding down, but his dream came true. He'll get the chance now to play with his son. New Lakers coach J.J. Redick is hiring Nate McMillan and Scott Brooks as his top assistants. McMillan and Brooks have a combined 31 years of head coaching experience in the NBA. Chicago Sky rookie Angel Reese set a WNBA record with 10 straight double-doubles. Candace Parker had the previous record with 9 when she was with the LA Sparks in 2015. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Happy anniversary, KBLA!
KBLA Talk 1580 is now celebrating 3 years of amplifying our voice and uplifting our community. We deeply appreciate your support of this radio station and will always do our level best to earn your support. Here's to many more years of loving and serving our community. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we've got your black.
I know it's gonna happen without you.
Climate justice, climate equity, climate resilience. By any other name, we demand environmental justice in 2024 and beyond. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we don't black down. Our city's hottest weeks of summer are approaching. If you're 60 or older, you're at risk of heat stroke or worse. Extreme heat can kill. That's why KBLA Talk 1580 is part of our year-long climate justice campaign. Has partnered with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and the LA City Department of Aging for LADWP's Powered by Equity event, Heat Relief for Seniors Resource Fair. Join fellow LA seniors who hope to beat the heat and stay safe on Monday, July 15th, 10 a.m. at the Watts Labor Community Action Center in South Los Angeles. Learn about LADWP's Easy Save and Level Pay programs to help lower your monthly electric bill. And there will be tips and resources to be ready and safe in the heat. LADWP customers 60 years or older will be eligible to receive a portable air conditioner while supplies last. Personal ID and your LADWP bill are required. Contact your LA Department of Aging Neighborhood Senior Center for Cool LA Heat Relief for Seniors participation details, or visit www.ladwp.com/events.
Hey, LA, it's time to step up and be a climate change hero. Go Metro and help us shape a better future for all Angelinos. From enhancing our diverse communities to preserving our planet, Metro is dedicated to making a positive impact with every ride. Start your journey at metro.net.
Hey there, Los Angeles. This is James Lucky Jr., publisher and editor of Los Angeles News Observer. Are you hungry for news that matters to you in the African-American communities of Los Angeles? Well, buckle up, because we got the scoop you've been craving. Stay in the know and never miss a beat with our free weekly publications conveniently available near you. Or hop on the digital wave and become an exclusive subscriber at OGNSC.com. Don't forget to join the party on Instagram and Twitter at OGNSCINC for behind-the-scenes access and sizzling updates. No more FOMO. Let's stay informed, connected, and empowered together.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
We're back, and we are talking in this hour with Dr. Liz Theo Harris. She is the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. She's also an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. She's written a brilliant article on the reason we need to stop Christian nationalism. Thank you so much, Dr. Theo Harris, for being with me. I know that the Poor People's Campaign is focused on eradicating poverty, working with people in low income, low to moderate income communities across this country. What are you saying to those people right now, many of whom, if you watch the local news, you watch cable news, you go to social media, you'll see many people who would fall into those categories saying they support Donald Trump. They believe he is a populist candidate, that despite being a purported millionaire, billionaire, that he somehow has the best interest of them at heart, that he's working to better the lives of these low income and middle income people. And, there's just zero evidence that anything he's ever done has been to benefit people who live in those categories. And if anything, we've seen him try to pit immigrants against African Americans against immigrants. He made the ridiculous statement during the debate, making a comment about Black jobs in the context of trying to say that basically immigrants were taking jobs away from Black people. And, that went viral, memes all over the place about, what's your Black job? Do you have your Black job? So clearly this is not someone working on behalf of poor people, but yet he's been able to convince poor people around this country to vote for him. So what are you and Reverend Barber saying to these people to try to disabuse them of that false notion that he is working for them?
Well, indeed, Aria. I mean, I think the reality is that I mean there are 135 million people who are poor and low income in this country. A third of the U.S. electorate of registered voters are poor and low income. It's the biggest voting bloc that really exists. And the reality, when you look back at the actual demographics of who's voting and who's voting for which candidates, is that poor and low income people are not in the main voting for folks like Donald Trump. The median income of those that voted for Donald Trump is significantly higher than in Hillary Clinton in 2016 or Joe Biden in 2020. But there still is this notion, this idea out there that it's poor and low income and lower middle income people, especially white people, in rural areas that are voting for Trump. And I'm not going to say that there aren't. They're
Okay,
surely.
let me stop you for a second because there are polls, Reverend, that show that he does better amongst uneducated white voters than Joe Biden and other Democrats, even when Hillary Clinton was running against him.
Yes, I think one of the things that I think is really important about this polling is that many of the New York Times and the media have now put an equal sign between not college educated and low income, when actually there are a lot of folk that are middle age and older who are not college educated, but who are not low income either. They're more middle income people, and that poor and low income people in the pretty vast majorities vote for politicians that are not passing huge tax cuts for wealthy Americans who are advocating for living wages and healthcare and these kinds of programs. And what we see is that when poor and low income people vote, poor and low income people vote at a way lower percentage than anyone else in the country. But when folk do vote, we saw this in 2020. It's the folks that make a difference in battleground states. I mean, it's who put folks like Raphael Warnock. It's shifted the whole U.S. Senate. It's who voted. It's the indigenous Native Americans who were so important. And someone like Joe Biden's victory. Who are 40%, 60%, 65% poor and low income people. Indigenous people are poor and low income. 60% of Black Americans are poor and low income. But with white folk, it's about a third of white people who are poor and low income. But in raw numbers, the largest segment of people, including voters. But what we saw in Georgia, what we saw in other places, and in some of these midterm elections, is that when poor and low income people turn out and vote around an agenda that talks about healthcare, that talks about, living wage jobs, that talks about things like a child tax credit that lifts, people out of poverty, that actually poor and low income people have the power to shift the entire political calculus and exceed the margin of victory, even in places where more extremist candidates have won before. And so much of our work right now is about touching and reaching out and empowering poor and low income voters that they can make a difference when they vote their demands, and those demands being, about these issues that are bread and butter issues for people.
So I hear what you're saying, and I know that polling is inherently flawed, that depending on who's doing the poll, who they're talking to, how they're phrasing the questions. But I'm thinking about southern states that have GOP supermajority, legislatures, poor states like Mississippi, Tennessee, states that have a disproportionate number of poor people. How do you account for those people? Okay, so maybe they're not. Are you saying that they're not voting for these ultra conservative lawmakers that sit in their state houses?
I think what we're seeing is that so many poor and low income people just sit it out. because they do not believe that their votes matter. We did a study with the Columbia University Public Policy Institute, and of voting and the power of poor and low income people voting. And the number one reason that people basically said they're less active in elections is that they do not believe that their vote will make a difference. And so in states where there are these supermajorities and these majorities, you have literally millions of poor and low income people sitting it out. And in places, especially where it's thousands or tens of thousands of votes make the difference. In some cases, there's hundreds of thousands or even 1 million poor and low income voters that did not vote in the last election. And so we're talking about this kind of swing vote of poor and low income people, who again, when we vote around the issues that matter the most to poor and low income people, have the potential to really shift the politics of this country away from this extremism and this hate and this exclusion.
So in light of that, given that you said there are hundreds of thousands of low-income people who are not voting at all, that they're not voting for the Republican candidates, they're just sitting it out, as you said, we know this election, which many people call the most consequential election of our lifetime, we know it's going to be a tough election. And after the debate, there's some polls that show Biden trailing Donald Trump, despite his convictions, despite the civil judgments against him, despite all the other criminal charges that he's facing. He is, according to some of these polls, and we're just going to make it a given that these polls are often wrong, but assuming there's some kernel of truth to them, how do you motivate these millions of low-income voters who can swing an election, who could cause there to be a Joe Biden presidency again, a re-election of Biden and Harris, because they're likely to fare better under the policies of a Biden and Harris and under a Trump? What can you do, you being someone in your position, and all of us do, to motivate some of those voters to come out, to be engaged? Because if we ever needed them, this is an election where clearly we do. When we come forward, we're going to get your take on that. How do we get these voters who are sitting it out? How do we get them to the polls? Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
To help combat climate change, LADWP is helping neighborhoods have better access to electric vehicles by awarding nearly $130 million in EV rebates to customers just like you. From big savings on used EVs to building new charging plazas, LADWP is charging ahead to help all Angelenos experience the benefits of EVs. Get rebates of up to $4,000 for a used EV and $1,750 for a charger. Learn more at ladwp.com/EV. That's ladwp.com/EV.
Sometimes I struggle to get to sleep. My body stopped for the day, but my mind is still running. So I take ZQuil.
ZQuil, the world's #1 sleep aid brand, has a range of non-habit-forming products to fit you and your family's needs. Invest in a great night's sleep for the best you tomorrow.
I'm awake and ready to take on anything.
Better days start with ZQuil nights. Explore our products at ZQuil.com. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
Hey guys, did you know there's a generic form of Viagra that works just the same, but is 95% cheaper? And you can get it online? Go to hims.com/joy. Through HIMS, you'll get a free medical consultation, discreet shipping if prescribed, and the process is 100% online. To start your free online visit, go to hims.com/joy. That's HIMS.com/JOY.
Hey, LA residents, it's planting season and the perfect time to get shade trees growing around your home. LADWP and City Plants are giving every resident up to 7 free trees. That's right, 7 free trees delivered right to your door. Trees are great for the environment, help improve air quality, and can help you save on your bill when you use less air conditioning to stay cool indoors. Learn more at ladwp.com/free trees. That's ladwp.com/free trees. Have you heard of the 50-30-20 rule? This can help you spend and save your money wisely. So how does it work? Distribute your dollars into 3 buckets. 50% towards needs, 30% towards your wants, and 20% goes to savings. Use this tool to help your journey to financial success. Sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company.
Looks like Bobby needs a ride again.
Grab the keys. Let's take our auntie to the swap meet. Grab the keys.
Whether you're giving rides or hauling gear, do it all in a Chevy SUV. Head to your local Chevy dealer, where well-qualified buyers get 1.9% APR on all 2024 Silverado 1500, Blazer EV, Equinox, Trailblazer, and Colorado models. Chevrolet, together, let's drive.
1.9% APR for 36 months. Monthly payment is $28.60 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 17.0%. Must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available with lease and some other offers. Take the retail delivery by 7/31.
We're back with Dr. Liz Theo Harris, and I was asking a question about how do we motivate those millions of low-income voters who aren't showing up at the polls. And I'm reading a document saying that white Christian nationalists, as you said earlier, Reverend Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, happens to be one, that they are mobilizing and that they are visiting and focusing on swing states like Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania. They are actually signing up churches. This article says over 2,500 churches to mobilize these churches to get involved politically, specifically with the goal of getting Donald Trump reelected. Many of them believe that they are in some kind of warfare, that they have a religious duty to make this country a Christian nation, to return it to what they believe to be its Christian roots. And they see Donald Trump as being the person that will allow them to do that. So these people, Christian nationalists, very well organized, using churches throughout the country, and particularly in these swing states, to turn out voters. How do we combat that, Reverend?
Well, in the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, we have committed to reaching out and touching 15 million poor and low-income voters in this election and all across states, but especially in states that are battlegrounds. And what we have found when we have done this in the past, when we've touched millions of poor and low-income voters, is that nobody talks to these voters. That no one is, they don't hear their names or their condition, anywhere in our political discourse. They don't have many candidates talking about the issues that matter the most to them. And when they do, as we saw in 2020, I mean, granted, it was during a pandemic, and where people were kind of talking about these issues in a different way. But what we have seen is in any state, in any election where things like living wages are on the ballot, where resources for families are on the ballot, people turn out and turn up and actually do vote the demands that they have. And so we're reaching out. And
one of the things Donald Trump, we know.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just. Thank you. So you're saying they've got to have issues on the ballot that they care about, and when you are able to mobilize in the way that the Poor People's Campaign has done, you are able to get folks out. Donald Trump, started hawking this patriotic Bible. It's a Bible that includes the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Pledge of Allegiance, and for many, he announced this Bible, $59.99, embossed with this American flag on it. It says, "Let's make America pray again." Louisiana has now stated that the 10 commandments must be posted in all public school classrooms. Oklahoma just ordered teachers in grades 5 and up to use the Bible in their lessons. So, I mean, these Christian nationalists are making progress, particularly in these red states. They have state legislators who are willing to enact policies that totally eviscerate the notion of separation of church and state. And again, they are very organized, and they're on the grounds, and they're touching voters in these swing states. You talked about the efforts that your organization is engaged in. What do you think the White House, the Biden administration, what should they be doing to make sure that people are not, because religion is such a powerful it's a drug. I'll use that way. And people get very convicted. They feel very guilty. And when you use the Bible in the way these Christian nationalists do, you can convince people that what they're doing is, ordained by God, that they're somehow fulfilling God's purpose when they vote for someone like Donald Trump, or when they put the 10 commandments in the classroom, or when they, purchase this $59 Bible from him. So what can the administration do better to counter some of these efforts and these advances that are being made?
I mean, we need to be hearing from all levels of politicians and folks that want our votes about the issues that matter, and not just what they've done, but what they're going to do. And that will be motivating. I mean, and seeing candidates fight around these issues, put forward policies, they are there. I mean, poverty could be abolished tomorrow if we had the political will to do so. We have the resources. And we saw in something like the child tax credit that it could lift 4 million children up above the poverty line, only to not be extended and to throw those kids right back below poverty, right? So, I mean, just with one program, let alone all the things that are at the disposal of these congressional leaders, these senators, and the White House. And so what we have to hear is these politicians putting out these issues that matter, not just saying everything's fine and dandy. I mean, we have climate chaos. We have the Supreme Court banning homelessness. We have, a real fight on our hands. And it doesn't have to be all gloom and doom, but people see what's going on. They're impacted by it themselves. And I think if we can have politicians that are out there fighting alongside the people, saying it doesn't have to be this way. We're going to put forward legislation and policies and programs that actually, lift from the bottom up and lift the load of poverty and pay people a living wage. I think we will see in the election many people turn out because, even though these Christian nationalists, these white Christian nationalists are gaining momentum and power, the majority of even Christians do not agree with them. But they're the only game in town. They're the only folks that are talking about religion. They're the folks that are showing up when storms happen and feeding people. They're the ones going to churches and telling people to go out and vote. And so we gotta play hard. I mean, we're going to always be a nonpartisan movement. We won't endorse any candidates, but we will talk about where people stand, and then folks are smart enough to make a choice about, is that candidate for living wages? Is that candidate, for protecting women's rights? Is that candidate going to protect our public education system? Is our candidate going to, allow for there to be a freedom of religion? Because people are of different faith traditions in this country, and it's part of what makes it great. And are we going to be able to, be the diverse, multiracial democracy that we want to live in? Because that's really what's at stake. And is this going to be a democracy worth fighting for? And this election is posing that question to us. And what we're saying in the Poor People's Campaign and at the Cairo Center that I direct is we're going to wake this sleeping giant of poor and low-income voters. We're going to enlarge and enliven this electorate of poor and low-income people. And we're going to change the whole political landscape of this country. And we're going to put justice and liberty and all the things that our Constitution says it upholds. And we're going to make us see this, on our political stage.
Yeah, it's really startling. You talked about the momentum that they're gaining. Some research has shown that more than half of Republicans believe the country should be a strictly Christian nation, either adhering to the ideals of Christian nationalism or sympathizing with those views. Christian nationalism is being used across the political spectrum. So not just on the right, but on the left, and that it's being written about and talked about more so than ever. And it's not going away. It's something that we should definitely be aware of. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing at the Poor People's Campaign. You have a new book out. It's called Always. Well, it's not a new book, but it's a great book that people should know about. It's called Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor. Again, the book is called Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor. It came out a couple of years ago, but so much of the book is still as relevant today as it was when you wrote the book several years ago. This Christian nationalism is real, something that people should be aware of. It's very scary because it's totally antithetical to our Constitution that says there should be a separation of church and state. And when these state legislators are saying, put the 10 Commandments up, make kids read the Bible, that's what should be happening in Christian schools that parents select. If you go to a Catholic school, a Protestant school, or even a Jewish school, they should teach you about whatever that religion is. But if you go to a public school in this country, you should not be forced to learn the Christian principles or Christian doctrine of the state legislators, because we are not a monolithic country. We don't all agree on the Bible. We don't all agree on what Christianity is or what it should look like. And so the notion that your child is going to be forced to accept the religion of someone else is no different than what we saw in the early years of this country when Christians were, proselytizing and forcing indigenous people, forcing enslaved people to follow their form of religion. And we now know that form of religion, many times is mixed in with white supremacy and other very hate-filled, racist policies and doctrines. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Liz Theo Harris. Thanks to Dr. William Barber. You guys are doing God's work for sure, trying to eradicate poverty in this country and working to lift up issues of social justice, equity, and equality for all people. We're going to stay on this issue of how do we ensure that people are not being gaslit and manipulated and brainwashed into believing that somehow these Christian nationalists are speaking the word of Jesus or in any way spreading the religion of Jesus. Again, we are out of time. Thank you so much again, Dr. Theo Harris. Tomorrow is the 4th of July. Make sure you stay tuned into KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot of good programming for you tomorrow. In between those barbecues, check out what Frederick Douglass had to say the day after the 4th of July, talking about why this was a day for him to mourn and not to celebrate. Next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers in the Raw Report. Stay with us.